Hello everyone, welcome. I am excited to be here. I am excited to share with all of you what I have been building. Some of you have gotten early access, but for the rest of you, today is the day. We are launching this guide. So just say hi in chat. I'm trying to figure out, this is new software for me, but I see a handful of people are here already. So thank you for being on time. I appreciate you. Yeah, the music is high. Okay, let's find out if we can lower it. We're just jamming out, right? There you go. How's that? We'll go a little bit more. All right, well, let's start chatting. So this is all about terminal workflows. So if you've heard of things like Tmux or Neovim, this is your guide into it. So if you already do this kind of stuff, you may find that this guide that I wrote that we're talking about today might be a little bit of the basics, the beginner stuff. But I'm really excited to get more people into this, and so I want people to see that there are other options to things than like VS Code or any of the more clunky editors that are out there. And not only is it an alternative option, it can be kind of a fun hobby to get into. For those of us, I recognize some faces here. This is fun, and it can be a time sink, but it can be interesting and rewarding, I think, by tinkering. And so there's a lot of tinkerers out there that we have all these interesting conversations online, but I run into a lot of people who say, I don't know where to start. And so that's what this is about. And so I ran it just a few minutes ago. Let's see, it should be live. So if you guys want, of course this is version 1. I made a lot of changes to my website over the past few weeks, working really hard at getting this ready for everyone. And so you'll notice that it's just 8 lessons, so there's 8 topics. We'll go through some of them today. Maybe I'll do a little screen share and we'll kind of go through the course together, especially since this will be recorded, and so people will have a chance to go through this if they want to. But I want questions. So if you use Tmux or Vim or the terminal in general, and you have questions about it, or you have a problem that you've run into, and you think that I might have the answer, please ask questions in the comments and we will see what comes up. I feel like I need a glass of champagne or something. Is anyone drinking something delicious right now? I think we need more. Have some more fun here. All right, let's do it. No questions, so I'll take that as a good thing for now. Just open up Safari. Woo! Love it. All right, let's do it, guys. So I'm just gonna jump in, kind of show it off. We'll talk about it. We'll kind of go through each of these pieces. So I know Homebrew is available in Mac OS and Linux. And if you use WSL, which is like a Linux emulator, right? You definitely could put Homebrew on that. And so maybe in the future I'll have more specific instructions, but right now I'm sort of assuming you have a Unix-based system that is Homebrew compatible. So let's talk about it. Present. And so this is the new site. For those of you that have been following me on YouTube, I have sort of a dedicated page now just to where all the YouTube videos live, which is really helpful. And this nice little image was generated by Midjourney, which was fun. If anyone's been playing around with Midjourney, it is a very cool image AI generator. So yeah, it can be really hard to get into this stuff, right? It can be hard to know where to start. And so the things that are important to me is efficiency, right? Doing this stuff quickly. The other piece that's really important to me is that things are intuitive and that feel, in my case, I have a macOS system, so a lot of what I talk about through this is kind of macOS focused, but a lot of it can be transferred to other systems. And so what I mean by intuitive is like, if I want to interact with Git, maybe an entry point would be using some sort of G command, like Command G, which I do have set up. Or, if I want to run specific commands, I can use abbreviations and shortcuts that are like mnemonic. And so those things come very easily to me when it comes to muscle memory because it feels familiar. And so we'll go through some of those today, but let's talk a little bit more about, here we go, free guide. We'll have to get rid of the sign up page because now it's live. But what I want to show off today is these are the kind of 8 big pieces that I think are worth a starting point for anyone who is new to the terminal but wants to have an efficient and effective way to work. If you're a programmer specifically, although this can transfer to data scientists and sysadmin people, even DevOps people. So it is pretty much technology focused. I do write a lot of my blog posts and things in this environment as well, so a lot of writers may find some benefit from it as well. And so Homebrew is kind of the entry point. This is the package manager. You can use different package managers, but this one is intuitive. It's really straightforward. There's not a lot of commands that you need to know, but let's talk about it. So here, we're gonna move this guy down here. So Homebrew, right, is our way of downloading packages and applications for the terminal. We typically call these binaries. I have a whole video about what is the terminal on my YouTube channel, which I do recommend you check out if you're totally new to this stuff and you don't even understand when this is downloaded, what happens, where does it go, what does it do. So I have explained that before. But installing Homebrew is really simple. You just run this shell script. And so if you just want to open up literally the terminal, right? This is the default application on macOS. You can paste that in, and it's going to install everything you need for Homebrew in your terminal environment. Now, the thing that we have to note about this is you can often just, let's see, I'm going to talk about it later on down here. Well, yeah, I talk about it in a future lesson, but it's worth noting here. I'm going to say which brew, and that will tell me that I have brew installed and available. And so I can do all sorts of commands. I'm going to switch to my kind of final environment here, but we can do brew. And when you run any command line tool without an argument, often enough it'll give you feedback. So in this case, if we type brew without a command, it'll tell us everything that it can do. So we can search for packages, we can look at information on specific packages, we can install things, update things, upgrade things, uninstall and list. So those are the main ones. We're going to talk about Brew Doctor as well. So there's a way for us to audit our computer and just make sure that everything's okay. But let's just talk about the basics. So we would say brew. Let's zoom this in for everybody. So we can say brew install, and let's just talk about like wget. So that's just a simple package that can pull, you know, files from the internet basically. And we'll say, hey, it's already been installed and up to date, which is great. Now, the thing people don't think about, especially for Mac, is that we can download graphical interface applications using Homebrew as well. So I just bought a new computer, and so when I bought this new computer, I had to start over, right? I had to install everything back, all my applications, all my packages, all of that. And so like things like Google Chrome, you may say, I don't know if this is available in Mac OS or in Homebrew or not. And so you can search for it, right? And we'll see, hey, Google Chrome is a cask. And you're probably wondering, what's a cask? And it's just a way of looking up like third-party like applications, like actual computer applications, not just like packages. And so there's lots available to you. My password manager, I think I downloaded everything that wasn't in the Mac App Store using Homebrew. And so let's just, you end up with brew install and then the cask flag. You can see I installed Discord, 1Password, Fantastical's my calendar app, Alacrity, which we're going to talk about later. And so like, these are all of the things that I was able to install without having to go to the website and download it and run the DMG or DGM and all of that stuff. And so we will just Google Chrome. And so it'll download what it needs to download and it will set it up for you. And just like that, the application is on your computer. Now, Homebrew will have, I think, thousands of potential casks and packages in their built-in system. And so you don't have to do anything extra to have access to this library. It's just a part of Homebrew. But there are packages that aren't a part of Homebrew. Whether it's a third-party developer just has chosen not to opt in to putting it in Homebrew, they can still use the Homebrew like pattern to allow any developer to download their package. And so this is one that I like using in my environment. It's called Tmux. It puts Git and Tmux together in your workflow. And so with this one, you can run a tap. And so in this case, this has been improved recently by Homebrew, but we can say the owner of the tap, the name of the tap itself, and then the formula. So the formula is like the thing that you're downloading. And so we can run something like this. And again, it's already been installed, but it would download everything in the exact same way as Homebrew. And it'll keep track of which taps you've used in the past. So when you do updates, if someone updates their tap, it'll properly upgrade and do all of its things, which is pretty cool. Yeah, you're totally right, Sean. It is, think of a cask as like a GUI app. And anything that Homebrew would be installing that's not a cask is like a binary. It's some sort of terminal-based package. And Dolov, I see your question. How did I design it? Let's talk about this. This is a Astro site. So for those that astro.build, this is just a framework. And so it's a framework that lets me build, in my case, static pages, because these pages get deployed to a static host. They are deployed through Netlify. So this is a really popular hosting platform. And so I don't pay anything for this service. So it's when you host static files, Netlify offers you, free hosting, which is great. And I do some basic JavaScript stuff. And so in that case, I use something called Preact. And Preact is a smaller version of React. And so if you were lucky enough to get in early and sign up ahead of time, this little input box when you fill out like your email and you join, this is done via Preact with JavaScript, which is pretty cool. And I like Astro because the whole page is static, and when the user scrolls down and visibly interacts with this element, it dynamically loads JavaScript in, including Preact, and it becomes something you can interact with. And then I use Netlify functions. And so this is like a serverless function that allows me to make network requests on my static application, which is pretty cool. So great question. It was all styled with Tailwind. For those that don't know, Tailwind UI is a great resource, but Tailwind CSS is the, what do we call this? Utility first CSS framework. And so I'm very quick and efficient with this. Got lots of cool Tailwind content coming up on the blog. Yeah, so that's a rundown of kind of how the site was built. And let's jump to this final section. And this is really cool. Hopefully some of you will enjoy this. Most people will just install packages on Homebrew and they'll forget that these packages have updates. So many of these things are open source. There's lots of contributors. People are asking for new features. They have to fix bugs. And so there is a method to this where you want to try to keep your stuff up to date, right? Just for security reasons alone, it can be really helpful. And so these are what I do every day, and I do them in order. So I brew update, I brew outdated, which just lists which ones are out of date. Brew upgrade will upgrade all packages. And then you can run brew cleanup. And I use prune all to kind of make sure that everything is removed that doesn't need to be there anymore. So brew will download lots of files, create symbolic links in all sorts of places. And so we want to clean them up, especially when we upgrade to a new version. We want all previous version like artifacts to go away as well. And then finally brew doctor. So brew doctor is our way of checking for potential issues. And Homebrew has its own set of checks that it runs through and then it gives you feedback. But I used to run this every day, right? I used to like physically run these commands. And I don't want to do that. So I created a little script that allows us to update it. So this is our entry point to like making Homebrew useful and helpful. And so I use a little tool called Gum. In fact, if we were to brew info Gum, we can see that it is tools for glamorous shell scripts. So if we take a little bit of a look, we'll see that it lets us do some cool things. And I'll show you how I use Gum. Basically, it helps me make a fancier shell script. And so this is what it looks like. I put it in .config bin, and this is the content. So we're gonna echo out brew, and we're gonna, do an upgrade. Let's see, we're gonna do an update. We're gonna check for outdated. I'm gonna have a prompt that asks, do you want to update these things? And then once all that's done, we clean up and we doctor, and that's the script. So I have it bound to a B script. So all I have to do is hit the letter B. We see everything's up to date, but we see that this formula is outdated. So we'll upgrade it. It'll download everything. It'll prune everything. And then it will doctor and make sure everything's good. If I were to run it again, we'll see it kind of go a little bit quicker. It'll say everything's all up to date. Your packages are up to date and your system is ready. There's no errors or issues. And I've talked about this a little bit, but this is kind of one of the more complicated areas of terminal development is paths. And so what we have to do in order for this to work is make the B script executable using a chmod command. So chmod plus X tells the system that this is a file that can be executed. And then we can export the .config bin, which is the place where we put this file, in our ZSHRC, and so this is the default shell for macOS. Whatever your default shell is where you would put this, and then we have to source it in order to get those changes. But Homebrew's great. I think it's really helpful to run that script at least a couple times a week to make sure I have everything up to date. And of course I automated it with the script, and that's Homebrew. Let me know if anyone has questions, but we're going to talk about Alacrity next. So there are so many terminal emulators, and hold on. Yeah, Dolov makes a really good point about packages. Here, let's just pull this guy up. Show. So, right, you may not know which packages you need anymore. Thankfully, most types of packages you download aren't going to be very big, so it's not going to impact your hard drive in any way. There could be security concerns, but I'm not too worried about that most of the time. There are definitely ways in which you can, I'll show you a couple tips for me. So I brew, let's just go and look at my abbreviations. So I do brew leaves. So if you do brew leaves, you can list all of the packages that you have installed that aren't like dependencies of dependencies, which that kind of stuff does happen. And so installed on request, this one will specifically show me these are things I've downloaded. I mean, at the worst case scenario, you can uninstall it and realize you need it and install it again. But this can definitely go out of hand, especially if you end up with, how do I say this? You experiment with something and then you realize you don't want to use it anymore. You know, you're gonna have to either go and remember to remove it, or it just stays on your computer, which I don't think is too big a deal. But that's a good point. Thanks for bringing it up. Cool. So let's talk terminal emulators. This is a fun and often slightly divisive conversation. So Alacrity is my choice. I really like Kitty as well. I use Kitty sometimes. And there's one called WesTerm that is really popular. I have a blog post I've written, I haven't published it yet, all about like, there's so many options, there's so many different kinds of terminal emulators to pick from. iTerm is kind of an OG, one that's been around a while, that people have been using for such a long time. I still interview people to this day and they are using iTerm. So there's so many to choose from. There's new ones, there's old ones. They're all configured slightly differently, but they're all serving the same purpose, which is I want to run a terminal on my computer, right? You need a graphical interface in order to do that. And so I like Alacrity. So again, we're gonna hear this all day, but you can install it with Brew. So Brew Cask, right? Brew install Cask Alacrity, and it'll just put it on your computer. Now the configuration files, we haven't talked about this much, but almost all of our configuration files, at least for this guide, all live in a home directory and a .config. So let's talk about it. So I'm just gonna get out of Tmux. So this is my home directory. It's almost always under users, and then your username will be a directory, and we call that the home directory. It's often referred to as by the tilde, and so I have a really basic workflow, or really simple, minimal like look, and so you can see here it's just like, hey, I'm on the home directory. And so what we want to realize is that most of it is in .config. In .config, we call this a hidden folder because it starts with a dot, and this has all sorts of things in it. Let's just show those. Right, we have Alacrity, we have Fish, which is in the next section, Kitty, Neovim, Tmux. All the things that we care about are usually here. And so that's just kind of a reference point for you to get started. Yeah, that's a really good question. So we got another question about terminal emulators. You've tried a few. You've tried iTerm, but you don't think you need to use it. You use Tmux, yeah. So now that you're using Tmux, like iTerm is less useful. So the pros, from what I can tell, the main pros from iTerm are that you don't have to configure much, like it just kind of works. But if you're using Tmux, you've gone through the effort of doing that already, then I don't really think that it matters anymore. Like you could probably just switch to a different terminal emulator, anyone you want, because Tmux is going to offer most of the functionality you need. But the con, I guess, for the opposite is just like you're going to have to manually go in and change files and update options to get the things that you want. But the whole point of this guide and what we're talking about today is that I want you to get comfortable going in and changing files and updating configurations that way. Especially once you download Neovim and get used to how that all works, it can be really fun and interesting and fast, even faster than having to click around with the mouse and change options manually through some sort of interface. But a lot of things are going to be here, so as we talked about. So this is the Alacrity file. There is a live reload option. So this is in YAML. If those that don't know that format, it's like this key value format, and it has indentation rules in order to understand hierarchy. So we'll notice it here. And so we'll set one environmental variable in Alacrity, which is xterm 256 color. And this one just lets us render colors more accurately for, in this case, for macOS. This value can vary depending on your system and your terminal emulator of choice. But typically you are going to overwrite the term value in order to tell you whatever system you're running how to interpret colors in order to render them, right? So we have these modern computers. We have, very, very nice monitors nowadays. And so we want to be able to have as much rich and useful coloring as we can. Oh, hey, someone brought up a great point. Alacrity is faster than iTerm, for those that might be wondering about performance. And that's the biggest selling point for me on Alacrity, is that it's very fast. Speaking of, I also really like it because it gives me this extremely minimal looking thing. Let's go ahead and move this stuff around a little. So there's no border. There's no title bar at the top. I have this semi-transparent look, which I think is very aesthetically pleasing. I can change wallpapers. You can see this is the one we have for the guide, but I change my wallpapers all the time. And yeah, it's just really a pleasant experience for me. And so this is the one that I keep. And so this is how it works. Buttonless decorations option on the Windows key. We can set the opacity. Mileage may vary there. You can change that value whenever you want. I turn off dynamic padding and I set a fixed value because I find that it's a little discombobulating when those values are shifting or changing. And we will need a nerd font. And so the way that I'm getting, let's look at all these cool icons that you see here and in the sidebar, is all achieved by nerd font, which there are some really good videos out there about nerd font, which I'll probably talk about more and share on social media. But nerd font is just a really cool way of having lots of iconography attached to your fonts. And so I use one called SF Mono. SF Mono is just a nice looking San Francisco font made by Apple, and someone was nice enough to patch it. Nerd Font has made some updates recently, so this may change for me as I use more newer, interesting Nerd Font icons that become available. So you download it. This one I installed with Homebrew, and the font is then set this way. So there's different kind of styles that you need to account for, and then the sizing. So right now we're of course way over, this is much higher than 20, but 20 is a great starting point for me. And then colorizing. So let's talk about Capuchin. Capuchin is We love him. And we're gonna use Capuchin later on as well. So we're gonna kind of get this cohesive experience. And it's pretty straightforward. You just clone the repo and you will end up with files on your computer. And wherever you decide to put them, I recommend where to put them here. You just import the Capuchin theme. And so all it is a set of key values that define the colors using hex codes. So let's just take a look at them real quick. So we've got Alacrity, Capuchin. So here's mine, we're gonna go a little smaller. So we got config, Alacrity, Capuchin, Capuchin Mocha. So we will go config, Alacrity, Capuchin, and here's the Mocha one as reference. So we got background colors and cursor colors and search colors and hints and all sorts of things that make up what Alacrity is. And so we've got normal colors, dim colors, and this is kind of an example of what the colors look like once it's set up. NeoFetch is a great little package, by the way. Give you a reference of kind of what's going on with your computer. Yeah, and so that's Alacrity. That's a starting point. We're gonna go into more changes you can make to Alacrity in the next section, which I really enjoy, especially when we get to Tmux. But let's talk about fish. Again, just ask any questions as we go along. Fish is our friendly interactive shell. I have some people that are hesitant to make this switch, but it is very, very fast. The speed alone is one reason that I love this shell. I think there are differences between like Z shell and fish in the way that they're configured and the language that it uses. But I have used fish for probably 7 or 8 years. So it has been around a while. I don't think it's going anywhere. It is often ranked 3rd or 4th under Bash and Z shell. I very often see fish kind of like below that. Aaron, I see your comment. We'll talk about it in a few minutes, definitely. But yeah, fish shell I think is worth it. And so I'm recommending it to people. So again, brew install fish. You do have to make sure that it exists, that it's installed, and so you'll do which fish just to make sure. And so which fish will tell us the path. So on a Mac OS, more recent versions of Mac OS, it puts us in this place, opt homebrew bin. So we have to remember that value and do a little bit of code editing. So we haven't done too much of this yet, but we need to sudo into an etc shells file. We add that path to our etc shells file. Again, I will go through this kind of quickly, but I want to acknowledge that this can be a little tricky, but I promise these are the most up-to-date instructions that I have, because I wrote this very recently. And so once you do that, you can get the path to your home directory is basically your username. And so you have to use that value in order to change shell. And so this change shell command, you pass the shell. So this value needs to be in the etc shell file before you run it. And then this pb paste, this is just kind of a shortcut. So if you don't know how to do all this, you should be able to just copy this value and paste it in your terminal, and it'll do everything it needs to do to get the right value. And that's it. You might end up restarting your computer. I don't think I had to when I did it. And so when you open up Alacrity, what will happen with these instructions being set is it will automatically run fish. Because you don't want to have to start the fish shell yourself. You want it to just be the default behavior of your computer. And that's what these steps are for. And then we'll talk about configuring. So again, everything's in a .config. In my case, it's going to be .config fish, and then the entry file is config.fish. And so we will add homebrew evaluation. This allows us to have access to homebrew and all its features. And you'll note that usually we do eval. We usually do something like this to evaluate a shell. And with fish, the $ is not necessary. In fact, you can't have it there. It'll complain. And so, again, it's a minor thing, but it's pretty simple. And then we have directories to path. So we talked about path in the previous step, and in this case, we use a fish add path because I find Z shell a little bit of a headache where you have to assign it to an environmental variable and then append the previous value on top of it. I don't know if you guys are too familiar with that, but like, let's just GHRC. You have to assign it to a variable, and then you have to use this $$ path in order to append all previous path values. And it's a little bit messy, and if you do it wrong, you're gonna kind of mess up your system. And so fish is a lot more user-friendly. Let's just go to fish, in fact, and we will look at the config. Oh, that's not it. Fish. We'll talk more about my Tmux setup in a little while. Config.fish. So we will evaluate Homebrew. We're going to talk about Starship in the next section. But yeah, so this is just kind of your way of getting into this. I do recommend disabling the fish greeting. It's going to be like, hey, welcome to fish, and I don't need to see that every time. There's also Vim key bindings, which is super great. So if I'm in the fish shell, this is the fish shell, we can like run a bunch of commands, and if I hit escape, you can see that I see this little V for Vim, and I can use Vim key bindings like B and W, and I can change a word like CIW. Now I can change it. If I want to, like, I don't know, delete everything after this, we could do D, which is a Vim command that lets me delete everything after my cursor. And so it won't do everything, but it will do all of the basic motions that you would expect would be available. And this often happens if I mistype something, so it's like brew in the do thing, and I'm like, oh, that's the wrong spelling, so I might just go back to E and replace it with O. And so like that kind of stuff works really, really well. I love that feature. I think Z Shell has it as well, so this isn't an exclusive feature, but it is very helpful that it exists. And then we haven't gotten kind of fully there yet, but we will want to set that the editor, the default editor is Neovim, so that when we try to open files, it opens it up in Neovim and not somewhere else. I really like abbreviations. I don't know, Aaron, if you're using this feature much, but this is like probably my favorite feature in Fish. So abbreviations work a lot like aliases, but they actually will give you the output. So if you're used to an alias, we could alias like BI to brew install. But in my case, if I hit the space key, it actually expands the words in line. And so I'll show off some more of these abbreviations. Mine are sorted alphabetically. So I have like brew, C for clear. So if I just want to clear, I can just hit C. Docker compose. I got Fisher stuff, which we're going to talk about Fisher here soon. I have lots of git commands. I have npm related stuff. I have pnpm related stuff. I use pnpm the most now, so like if I want to build, I can just hit pb, which in fact we can just do that. So let's go to my website, pb will just run it. All right, so also I have all sorts of things like that tied to my muscle memory, and so I don't have to type it out. Cool. Yeah, and so these are just assigned this way. ABBR, give it a name, and then give it a value. Very good point, Aaron. So I'm gonna highlight Aaron's point. What I like about it is if your alias you can't change. It just is there. You have to go into your dot files and you have to make a change. But with abbreviations, if there is something that you want to tweak, it's all there. It's all expanded and available to you. So you don't have to run the command. You can tweak it, change it, overwrite things. So that's a super good point, Aaron. Thanks for bringing that up. All right, I see another question. All right, does fish have FC? Let's see. I think I know what you're talking about, but let's see what you mean. So you're talking about like Control X and Control E. I think you would have to set those bindings up, but I don't see why you couldn't. I have one called Control R, which is my history. That one I'm a big fan of because it displays previous commands that I've run. I didn't talk about it too much here, but another big feature of Fish is that it will show you previous commands as like an autocomplete kind of feature. And that's all built into Fish. It doesn't have any performance costs, not compared to like, there's a Z shell plugin that does this, but I think it slows down your shell environment. So there's a couple of nice things. I want to do something like what you're asking specifically here about like popping up, like putting this in like a Vim editor, I'm guessing is what you mean, where you can do like more comprehensive changes and then like paste it back into the buffer. I think that is possible. If you figure that out, let me know, because I think that would be a cool feature. I know I recently have a Tmux plugin that will dump everything on screen into a Vim buffer, but it won't, I can't reverse that. I can't like make changes and then put it back to where it started. But for me, I would say like 90% of what I do is, at least 90% of what I do is abbreviations. And so I'm not even doing much. I'm just typing a few characters to do the majority of my work. Let's see. Sweet, we got some answers in chat. All right, let's get back to it. So we want plugins. Plugins are cool. Everybody loves a good plugin. Fisher is what I recommend for plugin management. Fisher is just a command line tool. Sponge is a really clever little tool that I found a few months back, and it will like, if I run a command that is invalid or that I made a typo in or something, Sponge will just get rid of it from my Fish history automatically, which is pretty cool. And so that, the only effort it takes in setting it up is running the Fisher install command. And that's it. So that one's really cool. There are so many other ones to choose from. If you want, I recommend Awesome Fish Shell. So if you want to dive a lot more into Fish and look at all sorts of cool packages and plugins and different prompt tools and all sorts of things, this is a great place to start. I may have used Oh My Fish in the past, but I don't personally think that it is the best choice. I know Oh My ZSH is a wildly popular community, like moderated set of tools for ZSH. Oh My Fish I didn't like, and so I use Fisher to download specific files as I need them. And that's Fish. I love Fish. It's one of my favorite parts about my setup, so I highly recommend you check it out. Now this one's really brief. I know that we're about 3/4 through everything right now. I don't know if I'll get through all the lessons we're gonna try. But Starship is a very simple and straightforward prompt. And so you just brew install and you source it in your fish config.fish file. And I have a few configurations I've set up. So if you're wondering, like this little prompt here, and if I run a bad command, I can see that, oof, it shows me a red X telling me that the previous command had some error code thrown. And then if I want to go into Vim mode, we talked about that, the little Vim icon shows up. And that is because I have set characters manually. We can also change the directory to blue. In the next section, we're going to talk about this being blue and this being blue. So I'm just going to use the basic ASCII wording in order to set that up. And so that's important to me, that kind of visual consistency. And then there's a bunch of plugins that I disable. And so this is just a TOML file, so it's similar to YAML, but the syntax is slightly different. I think Starship does a really good job with their documentation. And so there's a ton of them I just don't want. I feel like it's not necessary. Like the host name, it doesn't matter to me. The username also doesn't really matter to me. And we talked about Gitmux briefly, and I will have a whole YouTube video coming out very soon about Gitmux, but like you can see Git related information in your prompt, which some people like, but because I have all of my Git information somewhere else, I didn't want the duplication. It didn't seem necessary to me. So there's all sorts of plugins in Starship, and you can turn off as many of them as you want. And so these are all the ones that I decided to disable. Yeah, Starship is great. It's pretty. I'll just show it off a little bit. So if I go to my, this is a node project, right? So we see that there is a package.json file here. And so Starship will tell me that I have version 16.20 of Node running in this project. I do have Node versions in my system, so I can have a different version of Node for a different project, which is for a future video. But this is really great. It's a great way to get context about the things that you're dealing with. Let's see. Yes, very cool point. I love it. So one cool thing about Starship is being cross-shell. So you can show which shell you are in using which prompt you use. So it's interesting that you switch shells a lot. I don't. I tend to be able to do all of my work in Fish, and if I want to do shell scripting, I'll write actual scripts and run those scripts rather than switch to a different shell. But I'm sure you have lots of good reasons why you switch, and this is a great point. So if I were to change to bash, we'll see that the prompt changes, right? So this prompt looks very different. And if I go into ZSH, again, looks very different. So at least for me, I can very quickly recognize where when I'm in a different place. So that's a super good point to bring up. And I'm sure you could change your Starship settings to some extent to show which shell you're in. I bet you they have a feature for that, or you could write a feature. It is extendable, so you can add your own plugins, which might be something cool for you to think about. Okay, Aaron, so let's clarify this for a second. The Vim icon shows up because, so let's see, in my Fish configuration file, I have set something called Fish Vi key bindings. This is just a feature that Fish offers, and Starship is smart enough to understand that feature. It already understands how that feature works. I think it works pretty well with ZSH's feature that's similar. And so if I hit the escape key, in Vim, we call that normal mode. That's our way of entering normal mode. And so that's how I do it in Fish shell, is I hit the escape key, which puts me in normal mode, which puts me in this kind of different mode, which lets me make the changes I want using Vim motions. And then I can hit I to go back into insert mode, similar to how Vim works. But that's a fair question. As you learn Vim, you'll get a sense of how that feature works. And yeah, I think you're right. It just sort of flips the icon, and I'm like, hey, why not just put the Vim icon there? It's a part of Nerd Font, so why not? And it works out fine for me. Cool. So we're getting toward the end here. I actually would love to get on another call. I'm probably going to start going live a lot more often for those that like this kind of format. Tim, very good question. We will talk about it in this section. And so I have my ability to manage sessions. So sessions managers, someone previously brought up another tool, Zillage, if I'm saying that right, Zellage. Zellage is a great alternative to Tmux. I would love to give it a chance and like really like see if it can fit into my workflow. But Tmux is tried and true. I won't go look it up, but when I asked people what session manager they're using, Zellage was like 5% or less, and Tmux was like over 80 or 90% of the people that I asked. So it makes sense that Tmux would be more popular right now, but they've made a really cool project. And so let's talk about it. Tmux, again, brew install, like you would guess. You can create sessions using Tmux new and give it a session name if you want. You can run detach commands, you can run attach commands. And so what's really cool about Tmux is if I were to get out of Tmux, in fact, I could kill Alacrity altogether. So the application is not open. But Tmux will always continue to run until you kill it. And so let's put this here. We can Tmux attach. And what that will do is it will put us back to wherever we were. I'll talk about this in a few minutes. It's kind of an extra feature here that's not in the original guide, but I have a Tmux Smart Session Manager. I have a whole YouTube video about how this thing works, and it is now a Tmux plugin, which we are going to talk about briefly. But this is my way of getting around. So if I want to open up a project like my website, I can just hit a keyboard shortcut, which we'll talk about, and then the thing that I want to open. And if it's not open right now, like I can look it up as like a reference. This is like a directory that I access regularly, and if I hit enter, it can create that session for me. So pretty cool, pretty easy to jump around. This is the way that I have it set up. But let's talk about window commands. So Tmux is made up of windows. That's kind of where this icon came from. And so you can end up with multiple windows, and in those windows you can have multiple panes, right? Just like a traditional window, like just literally they're leaning in on that metaphor. And so they're not intuitive. You have to do like Command B, or not Command B, Control B, sorry, is the default prefix. And so Control B, and then you press another button. So like we're gonna do like Control B C will create another session, which in fact, I think it might help all of you if I perhaps show a little bit more about what's going on here. So this is Neovim, right? If I create a new one like prefix C, it will create a new window called fish, and of course we can switch between them. And so it works very much like tabs in all of our other editors. And so, and then we can like split. So prefix capital 5 for percentage, prefix double quotes for splitting the opposite direction. And I don't find this intuitive. This is my least favorite thing about Tmux. So I have sort of hacked it. I have come up with this other solution. No one else I know of has talked about this, but I am sort of an evangelist when it comes to this, and I'll show you what I mean as we get into it. So when we think of windows and panes, I just think of tabs. That's really all it is in my mind. So why don't we just bind all of these Tmux commands to familiar macOS shortcuts? And so this looks like Command T for new tab, Command W to close tab, Command Shift bracket to switch between tabs. If you're a macOS user and you use a lot of Mac keyboard shortcuts, this should feel extremely familiar. And so this familiarity is what makes me like wildly productive. And if you use VS Code, right, you're used to tabs at the top, and you're used to Command T, Command W, you're used to these things if you're a macOS user. You can absolutely do this on Linux environment too with like the Control key. So if you want to like do Control T to create a new tab, you can. You just have to be aware of like if the terminal environment deals with control keys, like We talked about Control R for history. You may not want to replace that if you want the history command. But I have found this to be so useful. In fact, I have one of my earlier videos is all about this topic, and I go through every command that I've ever created in that video toward the end of it, and I teach you how to create your own key bindings if you want to customize it to your own needs. We have a few base configurations, so these are all super helpful to me. They just help me get things done. And then the styling, of course, is people are always curious how I do that, and so I can set the status style to transparent. I position it to the top, I prefer it there, and then the status, I show the session name and I style it with bold blue, just like we did with Starship. So we kind of get the match. And then plugins. Let's talk about plugins. This one is called TPM. This is, I think, the most popular option for most people. I have written Tmux plugins, so I have also added to this. You'll see my name right here. So this is one that I forked that works really well. And it works like this. It works just like the other plugin manager we talked about earlier, where you just, in this case, we just clone it to our computer, and then we add these lines of code to our Tmux config, which again, if you haven't noticed, that's kind of the main file for configuring Tmux. And then we run prefix I. So I'll just do that for you guys now. Prefix I, capital I, and it will check all of the things you have in your config file, and it will install them appropriately. There's also an update command, which is worth noting, especially since I update my plugins. So it's good that you run that one as well. But yeah, let's talk about the one that I created. This is just a fork. I'm not the original author, but it allows me to, you do have to have Fuzzy Finder, which is a really great utility, which I talk about all the time, but you will have to brew install this one if you don't have it yet. And I bind it to Command O. So the default binding, I believe, is just prefix U. And so we take prefix U, we bind it to Command O, and now, if I pull up a file, like I'm gonna pull up tmux.conf, we'll see here that github.com is here, right? How do I open it? Do I control click? Do I command click? Like, what do I do? This works outside of Neovim. This works everywhere where you're in Tmux. I hit Command O, and it opens up a prompt, and it lets me choose the item I want to choose, and it pulls up my browser. What I really love about this is you can also do this with anything that looks like a GitHub URL. So this sure looks a lot like a GitHub URL, right? We have a username and we have a repo wrapped in quotes divided by a slash. So I've written the plugin to allow you to look at those and check it out. It just knows that those are GitHub items, and like we can open up my plugin. I love this feature. It only took me like maybe an hour to figure out exactly how it worked, and now I use it constantly. Especially when I want to go read docs and I want to, take a look at something up close. I love this feature, so I thought this was a useful entry point for people that want to know more about how Tmux plugins work. We mentioned the Smart Manager. That one is also doing the same thing here. It is just something you install, you set it up, and you can bind it to a keyboard shortcut. So mine is Command K. Will pop up my Smart Session Manager and let me switch between sessions. Again, there's a whole video about how that works, but that might be the next interesting stepping point for you if you're new to Tmux. Sweet. All right, we're kind of getting toward the end here. LazyVim is, we're not going to talk too much in depth, but this is my recommendation for a Neovim distro. And so Neovim is big. There's a lot of pieces of it that you need to understand in order to have an IDE-like environment. And I think this is one of the better ones out there, mostly because it does do all of the hard stuff like LSP setup, formatting. Like there's a lot to Neovim. So this is probably the lightest things that I've mentioned here. The installation page is really clear, but the basics are you clone the LazyVim starter code to your .config/invim, and then you can wipe out the Git folder, because it's really helpful in the future to add this code to version control, like your own repo, one day. And so we'll just talk about one thing. Actually, I think, yeah, we're gonna just talk about one thing today, and that is like, how would I get Neovim to look pretty and to have this sort of fully transparent environment like I have with everything else, right? Because that kind of goes away if you don't set that step up. You'll end up with this beautiful transparent terminal emulator, and then you'll open up Vim and it'll have a harsh background, and everything that was so nice about it goes away. And so here's the steps. This is our way of extending LazyVim just slightly. We can create a capuchin. We talked about capuchin. There's Neovim support. So we'll create a plugin. And in the way that LazyVim works, all you have to do is create an invim Lua plugins directory. Like, you have to create directories to that place. And anytime you drop a file, a .lua file in that directory, LazyVim will automatically read it and load it, which I love. I didn't like in the past having to take my new plugins that I wanted to add and configure to like some sort of array or list. In Lua, we call them tables. I didn't want to add it to a table and then create another file and like add the options to that file. Or even worse, like you end up with these huge monolithic config files, which were just a headache for me. And so that's one reason I love LazyVim. I think some of the other package managers do stuff like that as well, but it's a really handy tip. And so we will assign values. The very important one to add is this option for transparent background. And this is lazy.invim is the package manager, and it is going to expect these values in this order. So it expects the package name to be here. You can add optional keys and values like name and priority and options. And when you call options, it will automatically trigger the setup script that needs to run in order for a Neovim plugin to start up correctly. So lots of cool abstractions are put here so that you don't have to write a lot of code. And then a very important step in this case is we want to extend LazyVim. So if we create a file called LazyVim Lua in our plugins folder and we reference it here, it already is installed, but we want to take an option. We want to overwrite a default option value of color scheme to Capuchin, and this will be enough for Capuchin to work and do its magic and start it up. Astro Invim, yeah, sweet. So we have other recommendations as well. Astro Invim is great. I've used it. There's LunarVim, there's NVChad, which is a pretty popular one. There are lots of really good ones out there, so don't think that my recommendation is like the end all be all, but I'm very happy with it, especially in the ways that I can override things and configure things to my liking without feeling like I'm like pushing up against the existing configuration, right? It's flexible enough that I can adjust things. Aaron, that's funny. Aaron mentioned on YouTube about ANSI colors. Yeah, ANSI colors are weird and hard. I get it. I've spent a lot of time in ANSI codes. Yeah, I feel your pain there. Yeah, and so finally, just about Neovim, my buddy Elijah, I'm gonna give him credit here for now. He made a really great intro to like how all of it works. How would I get TypeScript support? How could I get ESLint added? How can I format documents? How do I go to definition? Like, I forget everything he covers in the video, but it's not too long and it does a really great job covering all the basics. And I have another buddy that's going to be talking about, he's going to be talking about Neovim a lot more in depth. So if you're following me on Twitter, definitely just kind of be on the lookout for that kind of stuff. And I'm sure I'll make more Neovim videos. It's currently my favorite editor. I'm going to stick to it for a while. Yeah, I've been using Vim Motions for so long, and so I don't think I'll ever move away from that. All right, let's talk about Lazygit. We are at this final stretch here. There's this one, and I think there's only one more after that, and we've gotten through everything. So Lazygit is a really great Git terminal UI, and it allows me to make all of my Git actions happen with short, efficient, mnemonic keystrokes. And so again, you guessed it, brew, install Lazygit. For now, we'll go here and Lazygit. So if you run it, it kind of fills up the whole terminal. It like creates this user interface that you can interact with. And we can use like HJKL to jump between things. So if I wanted to like jump down to different files, I could. If I want to switch between these boxes, you can see that I can use H and L, I believe, yeah, to switch between the different boxes. And like, let's say here, okay, I made this change. I want to change it. I can then hit C to commit, and I can just make my quick message feature, turn on window. Let's just say enable, or no, show window name. And we'll see that it shows this little arrow saying, hey, you need to push this one commit, it's behind, you need to push it up. And so if I hit capital P, it'll push it. And that's Lazygit. I love it. I think it's just so freaking handy. So much so that I have set it up to a Tmux command. So we can bind the letter prefix G to create a new window on the fly, name it Lazygit, and open the Lazygit shell. This is like our command. And you guessed it, we are gonna bind it to a macOS-like keyboard shortcut. So you can start to sort of see all of this compounding, I hope. But Command G isn't really a common keyboard shortcut that I'm aware of, maybe like go to. But in the terminal environment, G is for Git. That's just gonna be ingrained in my brain forever. And so when I hit Command G, it creates a new window. So you can see there's like a new window that have been created. Lets me do all of my Lazygit work, whatever I need to be doing. And then if I hit Q, I end up back where I started. So I love this. I used to use Magit, I forget how to pronounce it, but it was an Emacs tool for like Git management. And man, I loved that one. It was really, really great. I stopped using Emacs. I was using like Emacs with Vim bindings, something called Spacemacs, for those that might know it. Great library. I really enjoyed using that tool, but I just decided to go to Tmux and Neovim, and I'd really like this setup now. And so Lazygit is just the best one I have found. There's a handful of others like TIG, which is Git backwards, and I'm not thinking of them all right now. There's a few like Neovim specific plugins that people really like, but you have to have Neovim open in order to get to it. And Lazygit, thankfully, is sort of this universal thing. So I don't need to be editing code in order to access my Git. It's kind of universally available to me, which I really love. Fugitive, thank you. Someone just mentioned it. Fugitive is a very popular one for Neovim that a lot of people enjoy. And then there's some basic configurations. So you guessed it, this one is in a different place. This is in the library application support section of your computer. Git to UI, that's a really good one. And NeoGit, I'll have to try NeoGit. That sounds interesting. You use LG. Well, what's LG, Aaron? You can tell us more about that. Let's take a quick look. NeoGit. Magit for Neovim. Oh, we were just talking about Magit. Okay. Yeah, I saw this one. I think I was gonna give it a try. Maybe I would like it. Maybe I would like it. I'll put it on my things to do. I appreciate the recommendations, guys. That's cool. Again, this whole terminal thing, for those that haven't realized this, it's kind of never ending. You can definitely be in a place where you're happy with your tools and can be productive, but there's always going to be cool things to go look out for and explore and discover. And so being connected on social media is a great way of knowing about what's going on in this world, but yeah, very cool. And so I think I mentioned these a little bit. You hit the space bar to toggle files to the staging area. I can hit C to commit, to create the commit window that fills out the commit, and then P, I talked about capital P for pushing. So that's the entry point. The wiki has lots of cool information. I think the creator of LazyGit has a really helpful video talking about like interactive rebasing and cherry picking and stuff like that. So it's pretty powerful. You can do lots of really complex Git things with it if you want. But I find I'm very productive at just creating branches, switching branches, committing files, pushing, pulling, all that sort of stuff is just a keystroke away. All right, so we're just a little bit over the expected time, but here we're at the end. LF is a file manager. There are so many out there. An old school one that was really popular is called Ranger, that was originally written in Python. This one is definitely a predecessor to that. It is written in Golang, but all you have to do is brew install LF. I have a few useful options to set, so like set icons, set hidden, like we want to show hidden files, showing the numbers, telling it what shell we use, things like that. I also simplified the prompt a little. And if you want icon support, this works for me. I know it's not a perfect solution, but if you want to just install my LF icons Fisher package, it will set up an environmental variable that you need for LF to like just read all the most common files. It was pretty simple to set up. You could definitely extend it or change it, but it looks something like this. And so why don't we show it off a little bit? Again, we got these sort of relative line numbers. It shows me where I'm at in the path. Let's just like, I don't know, let's config, fish config. I didn't go into depth, but you can set up a previewer. Maybe I'll create a separate blog post for this soon. And what's cool is if I hit E, I can open up my editor and I can do all sorts of things. And if I quit the editor, I end up back where I started. I prefer doing it slightly different while I'm working. And that is, there is an LF InVim plugin. This is with Lazy, so if you just put all these things in, and you have to restart LazyVim, we can do it from the other side. So if I hit space FF, I get LF within my, as like a floating window on top of Neovim. I don't love the sidebar stuff. I think the sidebar stuff is not great. And so I can just hit space FF and I can look at the things I want to look at. We didn't talk about it much, but LazyVim comes with something called Telescope, which is very popular and very helpful in like being a file picker. But for me, when I am sort of taking a step back at my code base and trying to visualize it and understand its structure, things like that. In fact, why don't we just go to my website, right? If I want to like look at source, content, we can look and we can sort of explore the code base this way. And again, I'm just using like Vim-like bindings, so like H, J, K, and L to go like left and right directories and to go up and down entries. And if you want to use the relative numbers, we can go like 11 down by hitting 11J or 11 up to go back. And it's just helpful. I think most people get really tired of like having to LA, LS, right? I'm gonna LS and then I'm gonna CD into something and I'm gonna LS again. And like you start to end up having like this flow of like, it's not great. And I know most people like sidebars where like, I'm gonna pull up a sidebar and I'm gonna do sidebar stuff. I just never have been a fan of that. And so this is my option. This is what I recommend. All right, so that's it, we did it. That is the guide. I really enjoyed writing this up for all of you. I will be adding to this quite a bit over the next few months. I will also be going live and just like writing stuff, like I'll be making apps live, and so you can watch me code in action. You can ask more questions. Let me kind of scan through this and make sure there's no unasked questions. Aaron's being funny. Yeah, I don't spend all day doing this. The past few weeks, I've spent a lot of time thinking about all this stuff. But when I want to get stuff done and I just want to code, all these config files, all of these like options, all of this just sort of melts away, which I love about my specific setup. Is it's like you can just focus. In fact, I'm not going to talk about it too much here, but like if we want to open up let's see, like index Astro. I do have this Zen mode thing, which is pretty cool. So if I really want to focus, I can get rid of line numbers and Tmux, and like everything goes away with this little plugin. But I'm productive. I'm really productive in this setup. I can get to any file I want very, very quickly. So if we just said, hey, I want to like switch projects completely and I want to go and look at this specific reference, my muscle memory has been pretty hammered in at this point, and I can jump to everything that I want within just like, I don't know, 4 or 5 keystrokes, depending on where I need to be. So it's fast, it's fun, it's simple, it looks nice, I think, which can't be said for everybody's terminal environment. And so thank you all for coming. This was really fun. We had some interesting questions along the way. We had very helpful people in chat. So those that were contributing in chat, I appreciate you. I appreciate your questions. I'm on Twitter. It's probably the best way to kind of interact. And if you want to send me a DM there, you can. But I know that Twitter isn't great, so maybe I'll find some more platforms to be a part of. And maybe we'll have to build our own at one point. This is going to be saved, so this is a reference for everybody. If you are coming in, you made it all the way to the end of this video, and you weren't here for the live event, I also want to thank you for coming. This was a lot of hard work was put into this, and a lot of my other content on my website and my YouTube channel are about this topic. So if you want to dive deeper, go explore, ask for content if there's something specific that you want. Description links, yeah, I'll make sure that that's correct. Thanks for letting me know. That's it, everybody. I got a day job, so I got to go back to that and get some stuff done there. But it looks like many of you stuck around for most of this. I really appreciate that. And I think that's it. Everybody have a great weekend. Thanks for coming. I'm excited. I finally did this. I can take a breath now because I've been working on this for like weeks. And so it feels good to be done. I'm sure there'll be some grammar changes and some additional items that'll be coming. But be on the lookout for the next YouTube video. If you're not already, you can sign up for the email newsletter if you want that stuff sent directly to you. I really appreciate it, guys. Have a good day.